Hi everyone, today we're going to have a look at some methodology within the cognitive approach and some of the basic sort of elements really of research methods. So we're going to have a look at hypotheses, variables, lab experiments, field experiments, and the experimental or participant designs. Okay. So hypotheses. So hypothesis is a testable statement. So it's almost like a prediction that we make about what is going to happen in an experiment. Okay, and there's two types of hypotheses that you need to know about and be able to write. So you've got an experimental, or sometimes called an alternative hypothesis, and then you've got a null hypothesis. So your experimental hypothesis suggests that a definite difference will be found in the data. So this is almost what you are predicting is going to happen in your experiment. Whereas your null hypothesis is almost like the opposite. So it's a prediction that we use which says that no effect is going to be found other than that which may be by chance. So in psychology, we always have to account for the fact that chance factors could have affected our results. Okay, so our results may not have been brought about by the manipulation of the IV, and it may just have been chance factors. Okay. So this is an example, a study that wants to investigate the effect of glucose or sugar on memory. So how do we write a hypothesis? Well, we're going to have a look at how to write an experimental hypothesis and a null hypothesis on this study. Okay, so experimental hypothesis here would be we can predict that glucose will have a positive effect and will improve one's memory. Okay, so what we're saying is in our experimental hypothesis, we are making a prediction about what we think is going to happen. The null hypothesis, however, is the opposite. So when we write a null hypothesis, we always write it like this. So glucose will have no significant effect on memory. Okay, so that's our null hypothesis. What I want you to do at this point, I want you to pause, okay, so and have a go at writing your own, yeah. So a study that wants to investigate the effect of alcohol on driving performance. So what I want you to do is I want you to write an experimental hypothesis and also a null hypothesis. So pause and have a go. So our experimental hypothesis here would be along the lines of alcohol will have a negative effect on driving performance, or alcohol will affect our driving performance, something like that. And the null hypothesis would be alcohol will have no significant effect on driving performance. So remember, in our null, we're saying no effect is going to be found, which is going to be the opposite of the experimental. There is also, hypothesis can also be divided into one-tailed and two-tailed specifically. So firstly, a one-tailed hypothesis, or sometimes called a directional hypothesis, will give a specific difference that's going to be found between the conditions. So it's being very specific and very precise about what exactly we're going to find. However, a two-tailed or a non-directional will predict that there is going to be a difference between the conditions, but it doesn't really tell us what that difference is going to be. For example, is it going to be higher, lower, etc. Okay, so an example. So a study investigating the effect of age on obedience to authority. So this is a topic obviously from social psychology, but we're just using it as an example to write a hypothesis. So if we were to write a two-tailed hypothesis, we would say there will be a significant difference in obedience towards an authority figure between young people and old people. So just really focusing on this hypothesis, firstly, is in a two-tailed hypothesis, we are saying there's going to be a difference, hence why I've highlighted the word difference there. But we don't know what that difference is going to be. So are young people going to be more obedient or less obedient? We're not aware of this in the two-tailed hypothesis. Whereas in a one-tailed hypothesis, younger people will be less obedient to an authority figure compared to older people. So as you can see in the one-tailed, we're predicting which way the results are going to be, and very specific and very precise. We're going to say it's going to be young people are going to be less obedient or more obedient. Okay. So just pause and have a go and see if you can figure these out. So whether they are one-tailed or two-tailed. Okay, so the first one is there will be a difference in the number of words recalled by males and females. That is a two-tailed. Males will be significant better than females at mathematical and spatial tasks. That's one-tailed because we're saying specifically males are going to be better. And number 3, there will be a difference in driving performance between alcohol and non-alcohol groups. That is a two-tailed because we're saying there's going to be a difference. Note the word different. When there's a word difference in there, most likely it's going to be a two-tailed. And number 4, students will show a more prejudiced attitude towards the elderly in comparison to young people. So again, this one is one-tailed because we've been very specific and saying the students are going to be more prejudiced. Okay. Variables. So in psychology, we have different types of variables, which we're going to have a look at next. So the main two are independent variable, or the IV, and the dependent variable, the DV. The IV is the variable that you always change in experiment or manipulate. And the dependent variable is the one that you always measure. For example, let's go back to some of the hypotheses. So if we used the first one, there will be a difference in the number of words recalled by males and female. The independent variable here is going to be what we are changing, so which is going to be the gender. So we're looking at the difference between males and females. And the dependent variable is what we're measuring, so that's going to be the number of words that are recalled. Okay, so IV and DV. There are also other variables in psychology which you need to be aware of. And researchers cannot obviously control every single variable in an experiment. It's very difficult or almost impossible. So there's something called extraneous variables, which are variables that could affect the dependent variable. And these can be divided really into situational or participant variables. So the situational variables are variables that are related to the environment, so things that we can't really control, such as the weather if it's an outdoor study, the amount of noise, temperature of the room, etc. So it's things that are very difficult to control in the experiment. Whereas your participant variables are really characteristics that relate to the participant themselves. So tiredness, concentration, their IQ levels, their level of tolerance if it's an alcohol experiment. Okay, so those are more to do with the participant themselves. Confounding variables is when the extraneous variables actually do affect the dependent variable, because obviously the experiment did not have enough controls. And this really is obtained by doing an interview with the participant at the end of the study where the variables might be identified. So participants might state that they were unable to concentrate in the experiment because there was too much noise. So then, that then becomes a confounding variable. Okay, an example here, a study investigating the effect of chocolate on mood. What I want you to do is to pause at this point and I want you to write down what's the independent variable, the dependent variable, and any extraneous variables that you can identify in this example study. Okay, so the independent variable, remember, is what we change. So what we're changing is we're looking at the effect of the chocolate. So we might have a chocolate group and then one group that doesn't have any chocolate. So that's the IV. The dependent variable is what we are measuring. So that would be mood. And extraneous variables, really you can divide into participant and environmental or situational. So your participant variables could be related to whether, participants all have ever had a mood disorder before, their general health. It could be concentration, etc. And situational variables are, things that could have affected their mood in the environment. So things like weather obviously do affect the mood. So if it's a rainy rainy, cold, dull day, then that's going to make their mood appear lower than usual. You've also got lab experiments, which we're going to talk about. So lab experiments are conducted in a tightly controlled environment where the independent variable is manipulated or changed by the researcher to see how it affects the dependent variable, or the DV. Lab experiments generally investigate something called a cause and effect relationship. So in a lab experiment, because we have such tight controls, we can investigate how one factor causes another factor to change, whilst obviously testing a hypothesis. And now in a lab experiments, participants are most likely aware that they are taking part in experiments. However, they may not always be aware of the true aim of the study. So they might be deceived in a lab experiment at the start, but then in a debriefing, they may, be told what exactly the experiment was about. Now, a lab experiment is one of the most popular research methods that is used in psychology, purely because of the amount of control they have over variables, which makes lab experiments replicable and reliable. Cause and effect, as we said earlier, can be established, which also adds to the reliability, and it makes it more standardized. Because, however, it's an artificial environment, it does lack something called ecological validity. So an artificial environment is in a lab, it's not a natural environment for participants. Therefore, we can't really generalize its applicability to the real world. Demand characteristics is when the participant can sometimes guess the aim of the research, because subtle cues might be sort of given or given away by the researcher. So demand characteristics is when the participant might change their behavior sort of to be more in accordance with the researchers. So again, lab experiments can be affected by demand characteristics, which does affect the validity of the experiments. Field experiments are very similar to lab experiments. So the researcher still obviously manipulates the independent variable to see how it affects the DV. However, the only difference here is that field experiments take place in a more natural environment to the participant. So it might be in a school, it might be at a park, it might be in a town centre, it might be in a shopping centre, somewhere where is more familiar to the participant. So the researcher does still have some control over the variables, but unlike a lab experiment, there's not very much control over the environmental factors here in the field experiment. And finally, the evaluation. A field experiment makes a study kind of more valid, I guess, because of the natural environment. And participants' behaviour is most likely going to remain the same. Participants are not always aware, however, that they're being studied in a field experiment because they're in a natural environment, so they could be out shopping and they could be in part of an experiment by a researcher. The one thing it does obviously avoid is demand characteristics. So obviously if they're not aware, then there's no chance of them guessing or changing their behaviour. Because it's a field experiment in a natural environment, researcher does have less control than a lab experiment, which does reduce its validity because we can't control everything. And field experiments finally are more time consuming than lab experiments because, it's very difficult to conduct an experiment in a natural setting as so many factors have to be taken into account and controlled. Okay, so next we're going to have a look at participant designs. So participant designs is in psychology sort of the way we use our participants and the way we allocate them to the different conditions. So there's 3 different participant designs: independent measures, repeated measures, and matched pairs design. Firstly, an independent measures is where 2 or more groups in experiment are used. So participants take part in only one condition in the experiment. For example, if you're comparing 20 boys with 20 girls on reading tests, you would have a separate group of 20 boys and a separate group of 20 girls. So they're either in the 20 boys or 20 girls group. So that is independent. Independent measures design. However, they do require a lot more participants because you need 2 sets of participants here. There is a lack of control, however, over participant variables. Because we're using 2 groups of participants, it's very difficult really to match them on anything. We do, however, avoid the use of order effects because participants only take part in one condition. They're less likely to guess the aim, so demand characteristics. Repeated measures is the second design. Repeated measures design is when the participants are tested more than once, okay, on separate occasions. So the same participant might be used in 2 different groups. So for example, you may test 10 participants on 2 different IQ tests and then compare the results. So they might do one in the morning and then they might do one at the end of the day. So that's a repeated measures because they're repeating the test at a different time. Repeated measures have good control of participant variables because in fact you're using the same participants. Fewer participants are needed than an independent measures design, which is more practical. Order effects are likely, however, because they're taking part more than once, so they may get tired, they may get bored. So demand characteristics is also quite likely, and they are, I guess, more likely to guess what the experiment is about and change their behaviour. In matched pairs design, finally, is where different participants might be matched on important variables. So we're sort of controlling the variables and the factors that participants have. So age, so we might make sure that they are all the same age, they're from the same educational background, etc. For example, pairs of participants might be matched for age, gender, intelligence, or personality test scores to ensure that they have similar traits. So what we're doing really with the matched pairs, we're eliminating the fact that other variables could affect our results. Okay, matched pairs is a good design to use because it has good control of participant variables. So we're trying to match them on same characteristics. It does avoid order effects as well, so they're less likely to get bored and tired. However, they are time consuming because it does take time to obviously find your participants, and then you have to make sure that we match them as close as possible, and then really eliminating any participants that we can't match together. Okay, so there you go, match pairs designs. Okay, so going back to the start really, so just to quickly summarize, so the thing that we talked about were hypotheses, different types of hypotheses. So experimental, null, 1-tell, 2-tell, variables, the IV, DV, laboratory experiments, description, evaluation, and field, and also 3 experimental designs. Okay, so there you go, just a quick summary really of methodology and research methods in the cognitive approach.